Hi, I'm AJ Goen. I'm the school manager here at the Lake Wells Aviator Paramotor. I'm going to be going over some ideas on how to choose your wing. So as a beginner, what you want to look for when purchasing a wing, why you would choose an A over B or B over an A, and vice versa, why you wouldn't get a C or a D. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with the different levels of wings. There's A, B, C, D, and even unrated. Unrated are generally going to be a more advanced glider oftentimes because there's going to be a less sold wing. It costs a lot of money to test these wings, so that's why sometimes they're unrated. The EN rating system is generally how we go by the A, B, C, and D, and how they test those is a series of tests where they're physical tests as well as in-flight testing, all in paragliding setups. So let's just show you an example of what an A-rated wing would look like. Kind of a more blocky, rectangular style wing, whereas you're going into a B, and it's going to become a little thinner, but a little bit longer. Something like this. So we got an A-rated wing here. It's a little more blocky, rectangular. We got a B-rated wing here, so it's a little bit thinner and longer. Let's just go ahead and draw a C for comparison. And then, well, this is terrible. All right, let me draw this again because my drawings are terrible. So there's an A-rated. This would be like a Mojo. Let's go to a Spider or a Roadster. And then let's do like a Scirocco, a C-rated, or a Speedster. And then something like a Freeride, a D-rated wing. So we have the different types of wings here, A, B, C, D, and then there's unrated. Just a real quick profile. An A-rated wing, which would be like your Mojo Power. This is going to be a more blocky, thick, less efficient wing, but very safe. A lot of passive safety, meaning you can go hands up and reduce power to if you get yourself in any oscillation, and it will solve itself. As you go into a Spider or a Roadster, this would be a B-rated wing. It's going to be a little more dynamic, meaning you can pull less brakes and you're going to get much more movement out of the wing. It also is going to offer some more capabilities, such as tip steering, a longer trim range, and we're going to get more. I'll get more into that here shortly. Moving through the scale, just for comparison, we have like a C-rated wing, which would be the equivalent of a Speedster or a Scirocco, and then we have a D-rated wing, which would be like a Viper or a Freeride. Now, as we go through the progression of these wings, your beginner-friendly wings are going to be your A's and your B's. So if you're looking to purchase a wing, you're looking to just get into the hobby, this is going to be what you're going to be looking for, is you're an A or a B-rated wing, and preferably a low-rated B, like the Spider or the Roadster. So let's get into the comparisons here. A Mojo is going to be very safe wing. This is what we do all of our first flights on here at Aviator Paramotor. We use the Mojo for the first flight all the way up to like flight 10 to 15, and sometimes all the way through your entire training, depending on the style pilot that you want to be. Most of the time, people will progress to a Spider, generally around flight 10 or 15. And the reason being is because they've shown the skills that they can land safely and perfectly every single time. Now, the reason why we hold off on going from the Mojo to the Spider so quickly is because the Spider is going to be just slightly faster on your approach for landing. It's going to hold a little bit more energy, so you're going to get a little more flare authority out of it. So we want to make sure that you can appropriately time your flare to land nice and smooth with that B-rated wing. The other thing is that the Mojo offers so much more passive safety in that you can really mess up a lot and that wing is still going to fly. If you get yourself into a lot of trouble, really all you have to do is reduce throttle and go hands up, and this wing is going to take care of you in almost every scenario. A B-rated wing is going to be very safe as well. In fact, the Spider and the Roadster are only one category that's labeled as a B. They're tested in 23 different categories in the EN testing, and only one of those is a B. So that's what makes this Spider a B-rated wing. That being said, it is still a more dynamic wing. And it has some more capabilities such as trimmers. Trimmers are going to offer the ability to release those trims to allow faster flying speed. It's what it's called as trim speed. So it's going to allow you to penetrate through the air a little bit faster. So if the winds are picking up, or if you want to do a cross-country trip, that might be more what you're geared towards as a Spider or a Roadster. The other capability is it's going to have tip steering. Tip steering is for two reasons. The Spider or the Roadster, which is a B-rated wing, also has reflex. And reflex is more known in the paramotor world because what happens is you let your trims out and that puts it into reflex mode. That allows you to fly at faster speeds than a traditional paragliding wing. The reason why we wouldn't have this on a paraglider is because you get a little more passive safety if your trims are all the way in, so you want to quickly be able to get back into that configuration. Whereas a paramotor pilot, we have the ability to fly in premium perfect air. We call it butter air. And so we have the capability to let those trims out and not have to worry about turbulent conditions because we're flying in perfect air. Whereas a paragliding pilot has to use thermals or ridge soaring to stay aloft. A paragliding pilot has a motor on their back. We have a thermal on our back is what I like to say. So we don't need to have those turbulent conditions. That being said, you can let your trims all the way out. That's going to offer you a faster flying speed. But with that being said, you also have the reflex profile. So if you're fully accelerated on this B-rated wing, you can no longer use your main brakes. So that's the reason why this B-rated wing and above has tip steering. So what I mean by fully accelerated is on the Ozone wings, you can let your trims all the way out and still use main brakes. The reason why you would not want to pull main brakes is if you were fully accelerated, meaning trims are all the way out and you're on speed bar. That's considered fully accelerated. You're at the fastest possible flying configuration for this wing. So what's happened is it's gone into full reflex mode, and the trailing edge has a profile now to where all the weight is on the front of the A's and the B's, mostly on the A's. And if you pull main brakes, it's going to change that profile of that wing, causing 2 points of lift, and that can cause the wing to take a collapse. So we have tip steering on these wings at this case, so that way you can still turn left or right by using tip steering, and that's outside of that reflex profile. I guess I could show you a quick drawing. If you're looking at the back of the wing here, that reflex profile is going to be somewhere in this range. When you let those trims out, it's going to let this trailing edge pop up just a little bit right there, like a spoiler or something almost, and then you have tip steering. So your main brakes actually affect this entire range of wing. This is main brakes. It affects this whole part of this wing. So if you pull main brakes when you're fully accelerated, you're changing the lift points right here on this trailing edge. Whereas if you use tip steering, it's only affecting this portion of the wing right here. So that allows you to still do left and right while you're fully accelerated or on a long distance trip. A B-rated wing is very safe for beginners. It's got a lot of passive safety built in, but with all the additional benefits. We've talked about the advantages of the reflex wing, right? The B-rated wing, it has tip steering, it has a reflex profile allowing you to fly faster, good for cross countries or higher wind speeds depending on where you're flying. So that being said, it does add a slight layer of complexity. However, there's often times where people will buy a Spider and never even use tip steering, or they'll never even go fully trims out. It's still a very passively safe wing, but it also offers the ability to grow into it. So you don't have to use that stuff right off the bat. As you progress and your skills increase, what you can do is you can tie this tip steering into your handles. That's called 2D steering. So that's going to offer you the ability to turn in different ways. So you can actually pull main brakes down like this, and you're going to get more of a yaw turn left to right. And if you use tip steering, it's going to create more of a divey roll turn. So if you can use the combination of those things where they're both tied into your brakes, what you can do is you can all of a sudden want to pull main brakes and do a small yaw turn, and then you want to go back to the left and you want to do a nice divey roll turn. You can just pull your brakes this way. That engages tip steering and causes you to roll and dive more this way. So that's one of the cool things you can do is it changes the dynamics of this wing. It makes it a much more dynamic wing. It's a much more fun to fly whenever you have tip steering tied into 2D. Now with that being said, it takes time. You need to learn the dynamics of how these wings operate before you start going and tying in 3D steering. Really understanding energy management and not getting yourself into a situation where you're biting off more than you can chew. You really have to understand how to come out of those wingovers or spirals before you start going too big. Going back to the different rating wings, you have A, B, C, and D. So why wouldn't you just jump into a C or a D rated wing? It's very important that you start off with only an A or B rated wing until you get lots and lots of hours. On a C rated wing, you have much less margin for error. And it's very common for beginner pilots to go out and buy something off eBay that's either old technology where they're overweight on that wing, or it's too dynamic for them. What ends up happening is they scare themselves out of the sport because they get themselves into a big oscillation that they can't get themselves out of, or they go into a divey turn by pulling 2 inches of brake, not realizing how dynamic the wing is. So it's very important that you progress through these wings. Like I said, here at Aviator Paramotor, we start with a Mojo. You go through flight 10 to 15, then we get you on a Spider or a Roadster, and we really work on skill building and understanding energy management on these wings. So that's one of the reasons why you definitely wouldn't want to just go out and buy a C or D rated wing. It's very easy to get yourself into trouble on these wings. That being said, A, B, C, and D. One of the cool things about a D-rated wing is that it's going to be much less material and have much more efficiency than an A-rated wing. That being said, it's much more dynamic meaning less brakes to do more maneuverability. It's going to be a faster wing. You're going to come in with a lot more energy for landing. But if you get yourself into trouble, if you're flying in dynamic conditions, very turbulent air, and you take a collapse, you're not only going to lose a lot of altitude, but you're going to have to understand how to active pilot and get yourself out of that situation. Something like a D-rated wing is not going to sort itself out on its own if you just go hands up. Whereas a Mojo or a Spider, if you go hands up and you take a collapse because you're flying in really big conditions, turbulent air, these are going to sort themselves out on their own for the most part. An A-rated wing is going to take, it's going to stay on the same heading and reinflate very quickly on its own. A B-rated wing is going to lose a little bit of its heading. It's going to steer a certain direction if it takes a small collapse, but still reinflate somewhat quickly. A C or D-rated wing, if they take a collapse, you're going to lose a whole lot of altitude. You're going to be working your hands back and forth to trying to get that wing to reinflate before you can actually get it under control. So you really need to know what you're doing with a C or D-rated wing before you fly one of these. One of the other important factors in choosing a wing is going to be the size that you choose. All manufacturers have a weight chart for all up weight ranges on the wing that you're going to be choosing. Generally, they're a pretty large weight range. You want to be in about that 70% range on the weight side of things. That's going to be pretty much the sweet spot for most wings. If you're lightly loaded on a wing, what can happen is if you're flying in turbulent conditions, you're much more prone to take a collapse. Now that being said, you're going to have to be flying in some pretty spicy conditions, very gusty conditions or thermally air to take a collapse like that. But if you do take a collapse on an A-rated wing and you're very lightly loaded on it, it's going to be very benign, meaning it's going to be very subtle and soft. It's going to reinflate on its own and you're going to lose very little altitude. Now, on the opposite spectrum of that, if you're very heavily loaded on a wing, if you're at the 100% mark or even above the weight loading that the wing manufacturer suggests, then what's going to happen is if it's going to be less prone to take a collapse in those spicy conditions. But if you do take a collapse, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to get it out. And second of all, you're going to lose a lot more altitude. It's going to be a little more scarier. You're going to feel more of a snap when you take that collapse. You're going to feel it. Whereas a lightly loaded wing, it's going to be a very small tip collapse and a quick reinflation. So that's going to be the main differences on wing loading. I myself, I flew, my very first wing was a Spider 28. At that time, I weighed 260 pounds just, and I quickly realized that this sport is much more fun when you lose weight. The smaller you can get, the better the sport becomes. So I quickly lost a lot of weight and I became very lightly loaded in that Spider. So that as I lost weight on that Spider, I became lightly loaded. It became a little less fun than a heavier loaded wing. And so I eventually sold that wing and bought a different wing, one that I was more appropriately weighted for on that wing. I was right at the 100% mark, so that became a very dynamic wing. Much quicker to react, a little bit faster, a lot more fun in my opinion. Now I fly a C-rated wing, a Scirocco 22. I'm a little bit overweight on that wing, but I know the chances that I'm taking when I'm flying that wing. I feel relatively safe and I don't fly it in conditions that are above my skill level. So one of the advantages of the Mojo we've already talked about is the passive safety. I still fly Mojos. I still fly a Mojo extra large, which I am very lightly loaded on now that I've lost a lot of weight. But when the conditions are right, it's very fun to fly because it's a very slow ground speed, very slow air speed, and I'm able to play around at very slow speeds and touch down and do very nice spot landings And for me, the Mojo never gets old. It's just always a fun wing. But sometimes I like to go do cross countries, so I choose my overweight Scirocco. It's a smaller wing. I'm overweight on that wing, but I'm able to trim all the way out and really make a lot of distance in a short period of time. An A-rated wing like the Mojo is going to be something that you're going to want to keep in your quiver for pretty much the lifespan of your career. It's something that you can always go back to. If conditions change and you're out flying your Spider or your Scirocco, or let's say at this point you're already on a free ride. If you already have a free ride, you're probably not going to be watching this video, but let's say you are. That's something that you're always going to be able to go back to and have a blast on. If the conditions change, you can go down and land, and all of a sudden those turbulent conditions are numbed out by the Mojo, because now you can fly in conditions, we call it a Mojo party. You can fly in conditions that are a little bit more dicey, but since it's got all this passive safety, you can still fly this wing and have a lot of fun with all your friends. So one of the questions would be, why would I choose a Spider over a Mojo or a Mojo over a Spider? One of the things that I love about this is the trim speed on the Mojo is very slow. It's all the passive safety. You can fly in the turbulent conditions, but one of the disadvantages of the Mojo is going to be it's a little bit harder to inflate than, say, a Roadster 3 or a Spider 3. First off, it's a heavier material, and second off, the cell openings to create that passive safety are a little bit different than a Spider. A Spider has the latest and greatest technology. In fact, all three of these higher rated wings have what we call shark nose technology. Shark nose is something that Ozone uses on their wings to help make them easier to inflate and stay pressurized. One of the ways that this Mojo maintains its passive safety is the way it's designed with its openings. It's a little harder to inflate, but once it's inflated, you have all that passive safety built into it. The Mojo is a little bit harder to inflate, especially when you've failed 1 or 2 launches and it's soaking wet now because the ground has a lot of dew on it. The wing is now soaking wet. It's going to be a little harder to inflate. You go down to the Spider or the Roadster. The Roadster is going to be made out of the same material that the Mojo is. So it's a heavier weight material, meaning it's going to offer a little bit more durability. So if you're flying somewhere out of a unmanicured field or a beach where it's sandy, porous material, then you're going to want something like a Roadster. It's going to hold up a little bit better. Why would you go with the Spider? A Spider is going to be the same design as the Roadster, but it's going to be a lightweight material. What I like to say is the Roadster 3 is very easy to inflate. You use those A's and it pops right up and it just wants to stay there. The Spider, on the other hand, is like kiting with cheat codes. It just pops right up. It's filled full of helium, it feels like. Sometimes you don't have to use A's. If it's 3 or 4 miles an hour of wind, you just step back and the thing pops up. So the Spider offers a lot of advantages on kiting and inflation. It makes you look like a pro even if you don't have your kiting skills dialed in perfectly. The Mojo, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to get that thing inflated. It's a little heavier and it doesn't have shark nose technology, but it has all that passive safety built into it. Going back and forth here, the Spider, it also is able to fly very similar to a Mojo. You just pull those trims all the way in and now you're in the slowest trim speed possible, which flies very similar to a Mojo, a traditional paragliding wing. The advantage of what I like about the Spider or the Roadster is you have that really large trim setting. So you can go all the way out in those trims and fly at a much faster trim speed, offering you the ability to fly in a little bit higher winds, which would be great if you're flying at a beach or you're wanting to do a cross country with your friends and you can't keep up with them. This is going to be the wing you want to go with. Now, if you're flying out of a beach, you want the Roadster with the heavier material. And if you're flying just somewhere on a nicely manicured grass lawn, a soccer field, you're going to want the Spider. But again, with that being said, you can't really go wrong with either of those choices. Even the Spider, which is what I owned, lasted for a very long time before it even showed any signs of wear. In fact, you couldn't really see any signs of wear on my wing. So I would say one of the most important pieces of gear that you're going to purchase while flying is going to be the wing. The wing is the most important piece of equipment, in my opinion, because it's actually what's keeping you flying. It's what you're flying. You're not flying a paramotor. A frame's a frame, in my opinion, to some extent. The geometry changes. But a wing, that is what's most important because that is literally what you're flying. If your motor dies, this is what you're flying back down. So there's a lot of different traits that each of these wings carry, and it's important to choose a wing that's best suited for you. A, your weight range. B, the proper rating, meaning an A or a B rated wing for a newer pilot. You don't want to be flying a wing that's too spicy for you. And C, something that's recent technology, something that's been manufactured within the last 2 to 3 years minimum. I would say even within the last year. The Roadster 3, the Spider 3, the Mojo Power, all three of those are great choices for a beginner. Latest technology, a lot of passive safety, and all the technological advances that you could want out of a wing. Sharp nose technology, tip steering, reflex, pretty much everything that you want. What can happen is you can find a great deal on eBay, and next thing you know, you're buying a wing with only 10 hours, but guess what? They were flown at a beach and landed in the ocean water and it got salty and now it's very porous, or it's super old technology and it's hard to inflate, or it has very bad flight characteristics. It's very important in your wing selection to make sure you choose a wing that has the latest technology, the proper wing loading, and the right rating for you. So traditionally, as a paragliding pilot, they say that they can get anywhere from 250 to 400 hours out of a paragliding wing. But one of the things to consider when they talk about that is UV exposure. So paragliding pilots are traditionally flying in the middle hours of the day when the sun's at its greatest, because the way paragliding pilots fly is by using thermic activity. The thermals, they're riding these and coring them. So the sun is out in full force, it's heating up the ground and then causing these warm pockets of air to rise. So they're getting a lot of UV exposure. For us as paramotor pilots, where we get the opportunity to fly in premium air in the twilight hours and 2 hours after sunrise and 2 hours before sunset and then back into that twilight hour, we're getting very minimal UV exposure to these wings. So now you're getting wings with 700 hours all the way up to 1,000 hours, and they're still passing the porosity test with flying colors. As long as you take care of your wing, you don't put it away wet, you're not dragging it across porous ground, and you're taking care of it, you're not going out and washing it every time you get it dirty, you're going to get a long lifespan out of your wing. You want to keep your wings nice and dry, you want to keep it stored away, kind of fluffy, nice cool temperatures, not to where it's getting baked by the sun or in a really hot climate, just nice and cool, and somewhere it's tucked away in a closet where it's nice and dry. One of the things I was taught, and I'm really glad that I did, was before I started jumping through the different level wings, was I really focused on honing in my skills on an A-rated and B-rated wing for a very long period of time. I really made sure that I got my wing overs and everything that I was doing perfected on A and B-rated wings before I progressed through the other ratings. If you're someone that you know is going to push the limits, I would really highly suggest going all the way with a Mojo and just flying a Mojo for a long period of time, or even a Spider, and just staying with that wing for a long period of time. And so you absolutely master everything that wing has to offer. You can really dial yourself in on a B-rated wing so that before you progress into the next rated wing, you already have all those skills mastered to make sure that you're not biting off more than you can chew with a higher rated wing. It's much more important to understand energy management and how to dissipate that energy with a lower rated wing than it is a C-rated wing, because you've mastered the basics. If you can do it with an A and B rated wing, then you can do it easily on a C and D rated wing. Whereas if you take shortcuts and go to a C rated or a D rated wing before you fly an A or B rated wing and do those wing overs, it's going to be much easier to learn the proper technique. All right, so as you can see, there's lots of choices to choose from when choosing your wing. There's lots of different things to take into consideration. Wing loading, the rating of the wing, how old is the technology, how old is the wing. Like I said, one of the most important things to buying a wing is to make sure you know the condition of it. It's what's keeping you in the air. So ultimately, I think it's very important to buy the latest and greatest technology, a wing that's properly loaded and the right rating for you. Lots of choices to choose from. You have the A's and the B's. You have the Mojo, the Spider, the Roadster. All of these offer different capabilities, and you never really know what pilot you're going to be until you actually fly. So one of the best things you can do is just go and fly and find out what kind of pilot you're going to be. It's just important to make sure that you fly new equipment, properly maintained, and happy flying.